Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth. I'm Caesar Carino, your host, and our guest today is a very special friend of mine, Pat Garver Boris. Pat, tell us why we're special friends. We both graduated together, but what were we supposed to do on our 50th anniversary, which we celebrated not too long ago? Tell us, Pat.
We were supposed to dance the ballet together.
The ballet together.
Yes, we were to be ballet partners.
Did we do it on our 50th anniversary?
No, we just mentioned it.
We just mentioned it. That's as far as we can go. Pat, you were not always, and you're not sensitive about your age, are you?
Oh, no.
It won't make
no.
any difference if you are, because we're the same age.
That's right.
So
well, I know I'm younger than you.
Tell me when you were born, Pat.
December 30th, 1930.
I am 5 days younger than you.
No.
Yes. January 5th, well, actually 6th, January 5th, 1931.
Oh.
So we are almost twins. That's why we're going to do the ballerina together. And tell us where you were born, who your parents are, brothers and sisters, and all of those other kinds of things that we all want to know, and what they're doing, and your nephews and nieces, and all of your family.
Well, I live in Euclid, Ohio now, but I was born outside of Worcester, and my mother and biological father divorced in probably 1931 or 32, and my mother then married Wayne Garver.
Who was a what?
He was an attorney and a judge, probate judge in Medina County when he passed away.
Right, but he was an attorney in Wadsworth, that's correct.
For many, many years.
And everyone knows Wayne Garver. He was the dean of attorneys for years and years. And I've heard other attorneys say that, so that really makes him, you know, if your own people say that you were the dean of something, that means that you were really something. We're going to hear a lot about Wayne Garver today, and Ruth, your mother, and Pat, and your sisters, and all of that kind of a thing, because you have some of the most interesting things that I know of. And I know of these things for the past 60 years probably, because I've known you for at least that long, 55 years at least, that I've known you. So there are going to be a lot of things. But before we start on those things, tell us a little bit about your own personal family. That is your mother and you, and who else came to live with the Garvers and with Wayne Garver, and how you got the name Garver.
Well, I have two half-sisters that are older than I, and when my mother married Wayne, we were not adopted by Wayne, but we adopted the Garver name. We became the Garver girls. And I have a sister, Luella, that lives in Akron.
And she's a half-sister.
She's a half-sister. She's 75, and we lost our sister Jane a year ago, May.
That's right, I remember that.
Mm-hmm. And as I say, Luella lives in Akron.
Right, but you grew up as sisters, and you don't know what half means, do you?
No, absolutely not, or step.
Or step. Everyone in that Garver family was just a very, very powerful unit together. Now, something special about your father's, that is Wayne's birth, since we're talking about births, where was he born?
He was born in the Wayne County Jail.
That's a rough place for a judge to be born.
Well,
how did that happen?
He was the 11th child of his father at the time. William Garver was the sheriff of Wayne County. Mm-hmm. And at the time he was born in 1896 was the centennial of Worcester, or Wayne County. And as I understand from articles I've read, that the town people, to celebrate the centennial, were building a log cabin on the square. And he was born, they lived upstairs, the county jail was downstairs, and he was born in the house above the jail at the same time they were building this log cabin in 1896. And so he was named Wayne for Wayne County, Worcester for Worcester, Ohio.
His name is W.W. Garver, is Wayne Worcester Garver.
Correct.
Okay. Then he came to Wadsworth when?
He came to Wadsworth in 1933. The bank, which I believe was called the Citizens Trust, or the Wadsworth Trust or whatever, had closed because of the bank closings at the time of the Depression. And a group of directors approached him. He was practicing law in Rittman at the time. Had chosen Rittman over Akron because he had looked over Akron after he got out of law school and decided he didn't want to practice law in a large city. And so he went back to Rittman, to Wayne County, and he was practicing law there when these people from Wadsworth approached him to see if he could reopen the bank. And they had certain provisions, and he looked it over and decided he would take on the challenge.
Something very extraordinary happened when he took over the Wadsworth Savings and Loan, I think it was. What was that, Pat?
Well, when he went through the process of reopening, and as I understand, there were a couple of lawsuits that had to transpire. He did this in 40 days, and the people got 100% of their money back. The trust department got 90% of their money back.
And that was extraordinary.
Yes, it was.
And it's 1933, it's unheard of.
Right.
And that's one of the things that catapulted Wayne Garver to the top in terms of respect and admiration and so forth, and named him the Dean of Wadsworth Attorneys and all of that. Now, you came into the picture in 1933.
He and my mother married.
He and your mother married. Now, how did your mother meet Wayne?
Well, they had been friends. Actually, from what I understand, when my grandfather passed away, Wayne was the attorney that they had to settle his estate. And she actually was dating a couple of men. My biological father was one of them, and Wayne was the other. And my biological father lived out in the country on a farm, and she thought that this might be an appropriate place to raise children, so she chose him over Wayne. And Wayne, as I understand, actually attended their wedding. And I was born in 1930, the end of 1930, and it was in the throes of the Depression, and things were very bleak on the farm and so forth. And I really don't know the details, but that marriage ended in divorce.
Right. And was Wayne also married at the time?
No, he never.
He had never married?
He had never married.
And where did the half-sisters come in then?
My mother had been married prior to being married to my biological father.
So you had the half-sisters there, but you were all sisters and all of that. Now,
Right.
Wayne and then your mother and the three of you lived in Wadsworth. Where did you live?
We lived on Broad Street,
Where?
right next to the powerhouse.
Power House. Now, that's going to be so that right now, all of the places are intact. But
the house isn't where we lived.
Is not there anymore. And years to come, that may not be the case. So tell us exactly where the house was. What was a big building? Was the church there at the time?
Yes,
Okay.
Sacred Heart Church was there, and we were on the south side of Broad Street.
In other words, across the street from Sacred Heart Church. That will probably be there. Then you go east, and how
East.
many?
Well, it was just the railroad track, and then the powerhouse, and then we were the first house.
And the first house, there is a house there.
No, there's a parking lot and a generator or something.
there, that's right.
I think it was 319 Broad Street.
319 Broad Street, but there was a house there, and you lived there. And how long did you live there?
We lived there till in the mid-40s. We moved to North Pardee Street.
North Pardee Street. And where on North Pardee Street?
Well, that too is a parking lot, and it's 1 block north of College Street, right on the corner of King Street and North Pardee Street. It was the southwest corner. No,
Right.
the southeast corner.
Southeast corner. Right now, there's a row of houses on King Street, and right behind that was the Garver House. We used to call it the Garver House, as a matter of fact, where Pat Garver lived, because everyone knew you. Very popular in school, all of that. Right now, it is a parking lot for the
Municipal parking.
Municipal parking lot. That's correct. We're going to get to some of your childhood days here, but we first have to find out a little bit more about Wayne Garver and how he then went from where he was to becoming judge of Medina County. And I think he was one of the first judges from Wadsworth to be a Medina County judge. Is that correct?
Probably. I don't know that for a fact.
Okay. Tell us how that happened, and do you remember the campaign, and do you remember how
Well,
it was
he didn't go through a campaign.
That's what I wanted to hear you say.
Right. Actually, prior to that, he was city solicitor in Wadsworth for 5 terms.
5 terms, that's 10 years.
Okay.
City solicitor is the city law director.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. There's kind of a humorous story that maybe some people don't know about while he was city solicitor. They would meet, the mayor and the consul and so forth, and I believe it was on Tuesday night. I'm not sure.
Still is.
Okay. Some traditions never change.
That's one of them.
And they would be in their meeting, and of course they would be going on, and long a certain time would come, and Solicitor Garver would move for adjournment. And when he would move for adjournment, somebody would second it, and that would be the end of the council meeting. And for a long time, people never caught on. But he was a great fan of Fibber, McGee, and Molly, and they were on Tuesday night on the radio. And he did not want to miss Fibber, McGee, and Molly, so he would adjourn the meeting when it came time so he could get home to listen to Fibber, McGee, and Molly.
Pat, I can tell you with certainty that the council would love to have Wayne Garver there to stop those meetings at a certain hour. But they actually they've been much better than they have been. I was on council one year, well, I was on the council for one term, I guess, and one of those years, I was one of those terms. I was the president pro tem, and the president was out of town, and I became the president of that council. And there was something about a park on the north end of the town, or something like that. I forgot what it was. It ended at 11:32, started at 7:30 and left at 11:32. I would have loved to have had Wayne Garver there about Fibber, McGee, and Molly's time, which I think was about 8 o'clock or 8:30 or something like that on Tuesday nights. You say that he did not have to run for office for judge, he was appointed.
Right, he was appointed.
And who appointed him?
I believe it was Governor Rhodes.
Governor Rhodes appointed him.
And the judge that, the probate judge that passed away, and
Do you remember his name?
I have it in an
Kellogg?
article. Kellogg, no, I don't
No?
think so. Durhammer?
Who?
Durhammer?
Judge Durhammer? Possibly.
Possibly. I have it in some articles in my scrapbook, but I'm not sure. I don't believe it was, well, I don't know.
Okay. And then what year was that?
It was in the 60s.
In the 60s. Matter of fact, don't you have a picture of it here, Pat?
Yes, I do.
Here's something here, Wayne County, Mother of Judges, as Medina bench to his list.
It will tell you whose place he took.
Right here it is, and we're gonna see a picture of that. The Mother of Judges, that's Wayne County. It does have a lot of them. And let's see, it says that Wayne Garver, he succeeded the late Judge Cloyd W. Durhammer of Medina. That's right. That is of interest, and I'm going to see if I can find the date. That's October 30th, 1964, that he became Judge Garver. Now, what do you remember about the early days of his law practice, and what you did, and how you became involved yourself with him? And there were I can still remember from our high school days some extraordinarily funny stories. Of course, you can make anything funny if you want to. But tell us some of those really, really tender stories that we'd love to hear.
Well, some of the things that people didn't know, of course, they knew if it involved them, but at the time of the Depression, if somebody did, like say Wayne would go and take care of some legal business for these people, and they didn't have money to pay him, they would give him something in return because they felt obligated. And for years in our attic we had a saddle hanging, a horse saddle. We never had a horse, but somebody paid him for the services with a saddle. Of course, I always thought it meant that someday we were going to get a horse because I wanted a horse, and as long as we had that saddle, I guess my hope held out. Another time when we lived on Pardee Street, I noticed on the ceiling of my bedroom there was looked like a wet spot. And so I told my mother about it, and she came up, she looked at it, and when Wayne came home, she said, "You better go up in the attic and see what's leaking up there." Well, so happened that somebody had given him a cured ham, and he just took it up in the attic, probably was in the winter, hung it on a nail up there and forgot all about it. And when summer came and it got warm, well, the fat on the ham started to melt and drip through the floor and came down on my ceiling. My mother wasn't too happy about that.
Do you remember what cured hams, how they made cured hams?
Well, they put them in a smokehouse and...
salt them heavily.
Sure.
And put them in a smokehouse, and they would last for a good long time.
Oh, sure.
Yes, I can still remember that. They would last through the summer. And how we didn't get botulism or any of those other diseases, I don't know, but we didn't. I don't think we did. What are some of the other cute little stories about this man who was revered, but not too many people knew as far as that side of him.
Well,
You were very fond of him.
Oh, absolutely. To this day, I still think that he is probably the most intelligent man that I've ever known. But he had a very tenderness and a very sense of humor that perhaps some people didn't see, but we always knew when he was kidding us, because he had a dimple in his chin. And we would watch to see if his chin, we called it chin, was quivering, because he could keep a straight face, but he couldn't keep his chin from quivering. But also that dimple in his chin, he told us as kids, and of course we believed him, that he was in the First World, and he was a soldier in the First World War. He was in the Army for a year. But he told us that he was, that's where he was shot. And that's how he got that dimple. You know, we never thought about it. If you got shot in your chin, you probably wouldn't be here to tell the story. But he also told the story that he was in the Army and he was getting ready to be shipped over to Europe. And Germany heard he was coming and they signed the armistice because they knew Wayne Garver was coming, so that ended the war. So he had his tales that he liked to tell. And he was had a very, very large heart that a lot of people knew about, and a lot of things that he did we didn't even know as a family.
Could you tell us some of those things that he did in the large heart, and maybe I can help remind you of some of them?
Well, I know there was one person, and I won't mention their name, but she has told me since that he used to come and visit their family, and that her father didn't have much use for politicians, but Wayne Garver was one person that he really revered, and she had at least one brother I know, and she said that he would come often with a box with winter coats or clothing for those children, and they just, you know, the way it was given, they never felt like it was charity or whatever, but that it was given from the heart. And of course, he was very involved in the parks, Memorial Park, and really pushed to get the park commission through, I guess, for the
Do you
Medina
remember
County.
about the park and how that came about? We're talking about Memorial Park right after the war, which incidentally was named by Tom Cox, you know.
Oh, really?
Yes. He got the chance to name it. He is out of the service, and one of his relatives was in office, and Tom got the name of it, so he called it Memorial Park, and I think that's very significant. Mm-hmm. But there was a lot of work that had to be done before that park ever came. That was a great big field when we were growing up, as you remember.
Right.
Great big
And
field.
I don't even recall right now where that field was. It was out on the west side of town somewhere,
yeah.
wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Out near beyond the swimming pool, right?
Oh, surely, yes. It's a huge field. As a matter of fact, it didn't start to develop until the mid-40s.
Okay.
But then when it started to develop, there was a great big parcel left, you know, from that farm, and Memorial Park became part of that, and of course that lake and all of the other things. But before that, we had a tremendous amount, absolutely a tremendous amount of legal work that had to be done. And your father was heavily involved with
yes.
the legal work. Do you remember any of the stories about his involvement with the park?
Well, I remember him going out physically and doing, you know, ripping out trees and clearing land and that kind of
And that's
things.
another part about your father that very few people know, and that is that he was a real outdoorsman.
Oh, absolutely.
Tell us about that, Pat.
Well, he was in the Isaac Walton League, which is a league of naturalists, and conservation was a very big thing for him.
If he were living right now, he'd be on the farm preservation team.
Yes, and he would also be into this recycling and all that kind of thing. I mean, conservation was the thing, you know, we all had, but I guess practically anybody who grew up in the Depression had a ball of string in their kitchen drawer. And
I still save string and rubber bands. I never throw a rubber band away or a piece of string.
But you know, rubber bands, unless they're used, they deteriorate, so.
But you can't throw them away anyway.
You use them and they break.
That's right.
But yes, he liked to hunt and he liked to fish. And in fact, I think that I was the surrogate son that he never had, because he took me out to the driving range, or took me somewhere, and we set up some cans, and I learned to shoot a rifle, which I did reluctantly, but because he wanted to do it and wanted me to, I did. And the first time he took me hunting, we went rabbit hunting. And he shot a rabbit, and I had to go pick up the rabbit. And that was the last time I went hunting, because I wasn't going to pick up a dead rabbit. But he did go deer hunting, and he did take me fishing one time, and we got out in the middle of the lake, and I had to be quiet. And as you know, I like to talk, and I didn't appreciate having to sit in a boat and be quiet, so I didn't go fishing anymore.
So that took care of Isaac Walton right there, didn't it?
As far as I'm concerned, it did. It didn't with him, though.
Pat, tell us some of the friends that he used to hunt with and fish with. I think that's extremely interesting.
That I can't tell you.
Well,
he would. I know he went with a bunch of men that obviously he was close to, but I don't recall the names of any.
Do you remember any of the names of the Isaac Walton people?
No, I don't remember offhand.
Well, there are several of them, and I probably would be naming the wrong ones, for his era. Mm-hmm. But believe it or not, we had many people who were professional people in Wadsworth, whom people thought would never want to get out into the nature, but they were very, very strong in the Isaac Walton League many years ago, and probably 50, or not, maybe 40 or 50 years ago. I remember the Isaac Walton League coming to our house and saying, we would like very much to use this backwoods here for hunting, and do you mind if we put a sign up that says no hunting, and then and that was perfectly okay with me. To this day, that is a nature reserve for me. I have 7 acres of woods back there. It didn't even, it would have had to be about 35 years ago, because that's when I bought it. I didn't move there until about 5 years ago, but we had that for a long time. And to this day, that's a nature reserve. And I'm going to tell you a little story about your dad that you're probably not going to remember, because it's one of those things that he probably did that he never told anyone. Mm-hmm. As of right now, I have 4 or 5 huge brush piles in that little woods. Can't see them, but they're big brush piles where we cut trees down, or not trees, but limbs and so forth, put them on top of there. Because someone from the Isaac Walton League told me that if you put great big brush piles out there, you preserve the small animals, because, as we know by the nature programs, big animal eats smaller animal, eats smaller animal, eats smaller animal. And every Christmas now, I get a Christmas card from the little chipmunks and the little field mice and so forth, who are appreciative of that. Now, there's a downside too. I've had to move my garden because they unpolitely take what I put in my garden, so I have had to move it. But that came from the Isaac Walton League, and guess who was the president of the Isaac Walton League when that came by?
Probably Wayne Garver.
Wayne Garver, that is correct. So that's been going on for 35 years or more. He died when?
He died in 1968.
68, so, well, that's 35, probably before he died. The other thing that I'd like to have you talk about is his office, where it was, and who some of the people were in that office, and I think that's going to be significant in terms of some of our old friends.
Sure. Well, his office was in the Citizens Bank building on the 2nd floor on the corner right above the bank that he was instrumental in reopening. And his first law, he was there by himself for a while, and he had a law partner from Euclid, actually, Merle Balmer, who was had been a high school teacher in Euclid, I believe. And he and his wife came to Wadsworth, and they were here perhaps 2 or 3 years, and I don't know why he decided to go back to Cleveland. I think he went back and taught school. And then Lou Wilson became his law partner, and Lou Wilson was, I think, originally from Wadsworth, or his parents were, and he and Wayne were partners until Wayne became judge, and he took over the practice.
Tell us a little bit about Lou Wilson also, and the differences between the two personalities.
Well, Lou was much more quiet.
Kind of laid back.
And I really don't know that much about Lou, because I know he had worked for the FBI before coming, and he had a brother, Neith, in Cleveland, who was an attorney. And a very fine man, treated us very nice, very well. When, you see, my mother died in October of 1968, and Wayne died 4 months later. And so there was quite a legal
of course,
things to take care of. And Lou was wonderful through all of that.
We're going to come back to Lou Wilson here for a second, but we have to go to your mother now. Who was your mother, where was she born, and who were her relatives?
Okay, she was born in Rittman, and she was an only child, and grew up in Rittman. And
she was Ruth what?
Ruth Hull. H-U-L-L. Hull. And her father was a pharmacist and had a drugstore in Rittman. And from what I understand, they had the first cement sidewalks in Rittman. Her father had the first cement. And there's a little building, it's down, I don't even know the name of the street in Rittman, but there aren't too many streets on the main thoroughfare. And it still has, it's a brick building, and it has the word Hull above it, so evidently that was built. And they lived, actually it was a wooden building when she was a small child. She was born in 1901 or 1902, and she remembers a fire that they had in the wooden building burned down, and they lived upstairs. And they came, she remembers it was winter and coming down in her bare feet in just their night clothes. And her father was in the drugstore throwing apples out the window because he had them on display, and she kept wanting an apple, and he said no, those were for display. And when the building was burning down, he wanted to save the apples for her instead of getting important things.
Isn't that something?
And when Cars came out, she was quite a tomboy, and somebody in Rittman had a truck, and she conned them into letting her drive the truck, unbeknownst to her dad or her mother. And so finally her dad decided, well, it was time for him to buy a car, and he went to the dealer or whatever, the people that sold the cars at that time, and bought this car. And he said, well, I'll need lessons. And the man that sold it to him said, well, just go to your daughter. And he said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, she's been driving so-and-so's truck for months. And so he was quite astonished by that. And she married a man from Rittman, and they had my sister Jane, and then they moved to Chicago, and my sister Luella was born in Chicago. And then when that marriage dissolved, my mother came back to Rittman, and that's when she met my father. But she was a very neat person. She was a fun-loving person. Growing up, they used to go to Chippewa Lake to dances, and just had a good time. And had a lot of fun growing up in Rittman and doing different things like
those
that.
kinds of things. Well, I wanted to get that in there. Wayne's term as judge in Medina was during an era when a lot of things were happening in Medina. Mm-hmm. What do you remember specifically about things that you would read in the paper, things he would tell you, things that you might have thought, wow, how's this going to pan out and so forth? What were some of the things?
Well, there were a couple of things that he was very innovative. When he became judge and he was the probate judge, and he went in, and they had all these records in big, huge books, and he proceeded to put all this on microfilm and condense it down, and it was almost unheard of. But he went to the county commissioners and said, look, this is what needs to be done. This paperwork is becoming just too overpowering. They've had these records from the time the county began. And so he took that task upon his staff to get that done. Also, there was quite a push to get land in Medina County to be reserved for parks for all over Medina County. Absolutely. From what I understand.
And do you remember which parks came into being under your...
I don't recall right offhand, but there again, I have that in the scrapbook. There's quite a bit about that, and I know the county park district.
I think we're talking about it right here, and this is Judge Wayne Garver receives petitions for Medina County Park District from Virgil Boris and Louis Boley. And that was on April 20th, 1965. And we were talking here in the Hinckley district. We're also talking about what other parks that we have here? The Medina County, Chippewa Lake District, River Styx made available to the park board. We now have a River Styx park. One in, I think that was just about it at that point. But your father was, he put his heart where his mouth was, and he said that he is going to help people in Medina County get parks. And that's exactly what he did. Pat, that's probably one of the most prophetic things that he could have done, because Medina County has grown so rapidly, so very, very rapidly, that the beautiful landscape that we once had, and therefore didn't need that many parks, are now being usurped by housing developments and so forth, and we do need parks. And we are trying desperately now to get some beautiful park land to preserve that, because Medina County is running out of beautiful, beautiful land. This was 34 years ago that your father did that. And that was so prophetic. People at the time were probably saying, oh, why do we need parks? We have all of these beautiful farms. They'll always be here. They aren't always here. So he did a tremendous service for Medina County when he started on that park business. The one north of Sharon Center, I think, was one of the ones that he did. Onschlager, I think he did that one. And then shortly thereafter, not shortly, many years thereafter, as a result of some of the people getting interested, we had one out west of Wadsworth. I can't think of the name of it. Hubbard Valley Park, I think, something like that. And then now, just recently, we finished the River Styx Park, and we have a few other ones as well.
And those are parks that land was set aside?
Well, not only that land, but that started the ball rolling for people to begin thinking, because at that time they weren't thinking about parks. So he was very instrumental in that. We want to hear a little bit more about Pat herself, because you have a very interesting life in its own. Starting way back when 1936 or 35, when you started school, you were at that time living on Broad Street, is that correct? And you started school probably at Central.
Well, I went to kindergarten at Lincoln.
Kindergarten at Lincoln.
Just the 1 year with Miss Wells, that everybody...
Lucille Wells?
Lucille Wells. And I can remember being in her class and having graham crackers for a snack. And then first grade I went to Central, and I went from first grade till graduating high school in 48.
Do you remember who your first grade teachers were?
I don't. My first grade teacher is the only name I can't remember. I can remember all my other teachers, I think, in elementary school. And my first grade teacher got married while I was in the first grade, so that might have something to do with it. Also, I do have a memory of the first grade. My mother's birthday was November 11th, which was celebrated as Armistice Day.
Right.
And at 11 o'clock, we had to stand up because they played taps over the loudspeaker, and I became hysterical because I was sure that meant that there was going to be a war, because they had talked about a war, and when you're 5 or 6 years old, you know, you don't put anything in historical aspect. And they had to call my mother to come and get me because I was so upset in the first grade for Armistice Day. Well, they got me straightened out about that. And my sister's birthday is June 14th. So for a long time, I couldn't understand why they put the flag out on my mother's birthday and my sister's birthday and not on my birthday. And of course, they told me that they just did it because it was their birthdays and my birthday didn't count.
Right.
So, you know, I was very abused as a child, but it took me a while to catch on to that. But Miss Nolf was my second grade teacher.
Lulu Nolf.
And Miss Wells was my third grade teacher.
She came from Lucille Wells? No, wait.
No, it was a different, this was a much younger lady, and she was married. Not too many of our teachers were married.
Well, they weren't permitted to be married, yeah.
Well, they were just starting at that time, I think. My fourth grade teacher, I don't remember, but I remember our music teacher was Miss Hartman.
Alice Hartman. I had her on this program.
Did you?
Oh, she's still vibrant and vital.
Oh, yeah, she put on the operettas. And in the first grade, we put on, and I have the program at home somewhere, we put on Peter Rabbit, Farmer McGregor's, and I was a carrot in that play.
You were a carrot.
I was a carrot. and in Farmer McGregor's garden. And Miss Lytle was our 5th grade teacher, and she was the principal of the elementary school.
Right.
And she taught math, and she taught me something that comes to me very often, especially when I'm trying to balance my checkbook, that figures don't lie, but liars figure. Mm-hmm. And Mrs. Ringer was our 6th grade teacher. She was associated with the Ringer Food Locker.
It was. I was thinking of her, trying to think of her first name. That's just the B.
Elsie?
Elsie Ringer. Yes, Elsie Ringer. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, your junior high school and high school days I know very well, and you know very well because we both went to the same things. But just for the record, who were some of the favorite teachers that you had in junior high and high school who may or may not be with us anymore? As a matter of fact, I think most of them are pretty well gone.
Well, Ivy Nichols, of course, was one of our favorites.
Ivy Nichols Gehring.
Right.
Taught Latin.
Mm-hmm. I didn't like Latin, but I liked her.
She was a wonderful person.
She was a very sweet person, too. She was at one of our reunions not too long ago.
But she's, I think, not well enough right now. She married Bob Gehring, and Bob died shortly after they were married.
Mr. Cooper, the English teacher, was...
Oliver Cooper died also.
Mm-hmm, he was a very fine teacher. Mr. Kingsley Sears, the music teacher. Harlan Thomas, the band teacher. And it's kind of funny with him because for some reason I was drawn to the band room. I didn't play an instrument, but I guess most of the people that I was a group of friends with were in band or orchestra. So he would find something for me to do. And I just thought of this the other day, that at football games, I was the announcer at halftime for the Wadsworth Marching Band.
I remember that as if it were yesterday, and I became the announcer for the band after we graduated for some 45 years.
Oh, really?
When my children were in the band, 40 years or so, and I was the announcer. And you can't believe this, but I said, I can remember when Pat used to announce these as a high school student. I had to wait for another 40 years before I got the chance to do it. So you're way ahead of me all the time, Pat.
See. And he let me play the cymbals when the band played for the basketball games, because you don't have to be, you just kind of get the beat. But I would be having so much fun that the band would stop playing and I kept on playing the cymbals. I think that ended my musical career as far as public performances. But Wadsworth was a great place to grow up, at least in our era. And our 50th reunion that was just a few weeks ago, I'm still basking in the wonderful time we had.
Beautiful time.
Told my family, and they said, you really did seem to enjoy it. And I said, it was a very enjoyable time, because I guess we all enjoyed it because we were survivors. And
right.
We were friends for so many years through growing up.
And very close friendships there, very close friends. Who were some of your friends in high school?
Well, Marilyn Daniels Hostetler and Carolyn Harder Maffei, and Mary Lou Smith, and
she's lost one husband, Wolf, right now.
And Nancy Flack and Joni.
And Nancy Flack just lost her second husband.
Oh, did she? I didn't realize that.
Dave Sellers.
And, well, I just think we were all friends. I don't think we...
I don't think there was that
we didn't have a lot cliquish. No. We were, there were some of us that were closer. Margaret Cook, and of course, we girls were in Girl Scouts from the time we were about 10 years old, and Barbara Roth, I'm still in contact with her, and her 2 sisters and 2 brothers still live in this area, and she comes back in the summer.
Where does Barbara live now?
She lives in Chicago. She's lived in Chicago for years.
Barbara Roth. Pat, there's another aspect of your life that you haven't touched upon yet, and it's after high school. What did you do immediately after high school? Well,
I went to Kent State for 4 years.
And you majored in what?
I majored in home economics, and that was because I was very, very fond of Frances Rada.
Frances Rada was a teacher.
Home ec teacher.
Now dead.
And she went to Kent State.
And Tom Rada, her husband, now dead also.
And his father taught vocal music.
That's right, here in town, right?
Here in town.
Now, we're going to spell that name for historical evidence. This H-R-O-D-D-A.
Okay.
R-O-D-D-A. He was Tom Rada, and she was Frances, F-R-A-N-C-E-S,
And
Rada.
she was from Euclid, Ohio.
Euclid. Both very tall and very beautiful woman, just a beautiful woman, and a personality that fit her well. Tom Rada used to smoke one of those pipes that is curved down like this with, I don't know what you call them, but he used to smoke one of those types of pipes. So you went to Kent State University, got a degree in home economics, and then what did you do with it?
Well, I had planned to, I went to work for Sterling Linder Davis in Cleveland in the interior decorating department. I thought that perhaps I wanted to pursue a career in interior decorating, so I got a job there, and actually there was a Wadsworth connection there also because Don Good was the
CEO.
Well, at that time he wasn't. He was the furniture buyer, and I got a job in the interior decorating department.
Right. Don Good married Kaler was her first name. His wife's name, not Mary. Mary was his mother-in-law, but.
Well, and his second wife's name is Pat because that was a woman from Sterling's.
Yes, but she died then. Kathleen Kaler.
Okay.
Kathleen Kaler, and then she died, and they had one son, Bob Good. They lived on Woodland Avenue while they lived here in Wadsworth, and then he became CEO of the Sterling Linder Davis Polskis or whatever.
Allied Stores.
The Allied Stores, that's the one. The Allied Stores, that's right. And how long did you stay with them?
Well, in a way, I guess I stayed with them forever because I graduated from college in 1952, and in 1953 I met a man named Tony Boris, who also worked at Sterling.
B-O-R-I-S. Tell us about Tony Boris, and what did you do with him?
Well, Tony Boris was a furniture delivery man, and there was a man that drove a truck between the store and the warehouse, and he kept telling me, I have somebody that I would like for you to meet that works over at the warehouse and delivers furniture. And one day, this Walder introduced me to Tony. And shortly after that, Tony and I started dating, and that was, I think, in probably August or September of 1953, and in June of 1954, we were married. So I continued to work at Sterling's until I was a few months before I had our first child, who was born in January of 1956.
And how many children do you have?
6.
6? Mm-hmm. And who are they?
Well, my oldest son is Anthony, and he's has an MD, PhD, and works at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. He's genetic research.
As an MD, PhD. Mm-hmm. My son is getting a PhD in medicine as well.
Oh, yes?
Follow your son's footsteps. Chris, go ahead.
Tony went to Case, Western Reserve Medical School, did his residency there, and then went on to Boston and did a fellowship and has since been at the NIH. My second son is John, and he lives in Euclid, not far from me. He's married and has a daughter, Amelia, who's almost 10. He works with the county with behavioral children with behavioral problems. He and his wife both work for that program. My third son is Tom. He was born in 1960. He's married and has 2 sons, just moved back to the Cleveland area within the last month, which I'm very happy. They just moved down from Green Bay, Wisconsin. And then I have a daughter, Barbara, who is single, teaches in the Cleveland school system. She's taught since 1984. And then I have a son, Michael, and I have a daughter, Ruthie, that's married. And Ruthie was born the week after my mother passed away, my youngest child.
1964.
1967.
Oh, 1967. So Ruthie is now 31 years old. Well, that makes a nice legacy of family members, and unfortunately, Tony has passed on.
He passed away in 1991.
He passed away in 1991. Now, Tony was someone special. We met him at the reunions time and again, and if anyone should have been mated, the two of you should have been, because he seemed to have that type of personality that could accept the effervescence of your personality and the strength of your personality. And tell us a little bit about Tony and how you hit it off with him.
Well, Tony was a Hungarian, and he was just one of these, like you say, he was a person that He was a very hard-working man. He was 15 years older than I was. So he was in his late 30s when we were married. And our first son was baptized on Tony's 40th birthday. And this was a man who thought who loved children, but didn't think, you know, not being married for so long, that he would ever be a father.
I know that feeling. I was 32 before I ever got married.
So he was thrilled with fatherhood, and obviously it became a very important part of both of our lives. And he was continued to work for Sterling's till it closed. We still have ornaments from the huge Christmas tree at Sterling's that we put up every year.
Really?
They're gigantic. He worked for Sterling's, and then he worked for Halley's and retired from Halley's. I'm not sure just what year, but I was then working for the Cleveland Board of Education. I worked as a teacher assistant, retired from there after 25 years a year ago, March.
And what are you doing now?
Well, I'm doing all kinds of things. I've joined a quilt group. I've become very active in my sorority Delta Zeta alumni group on the East Side, and we do a lot of philanthropic things for the hearing handicapped, and wonderful bunch of women there, and I'm having a great time at retirement.
And you aren't really retired, you just don't get a paycheck from somewhere right now, but you're not retired as the rest of us here. I would like to go back to 1942-3, somewhere in that area, 1942 or 43. Wayne Garver and Ruth Garver were involved with some kind of a philanthropic movement within Wadsworth. What was that?
Well, are you talking about the March of Dimes and the polio?
Both, particularly polio.
Right. My mother particularly took on polio, and I have often said, if anyone were to ask me what was the most important discovery in my lifetime, I don't think I would even have to hesitate, because to me it was the finding of the polio vaccine.
And why? Tell us, that story is so interesting.
Well, as many people in our generation, grew up with the fear of polio or infantile paralysis. And few people realize that the reason Franklin Delano Roosevelt's picture is on the dime was because of the March of Dimes was started in January, which was when his birthday was.
January 30th.
Because Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a victim of polio. And that's why he was in a wheelchair or walked with canes most of the time. And my mother became very interested in this, number one, because supposedly my sister Jane, my oldest sister, had polio when she was probably about 5 or 6 years old. And I don't think they had a definite way of diagnosing it, but she wasn't able to walk. And they wanted to send her to Akron Children's Hospital, put braces on her legs, and put her in a program. And my mother, at that time, they were living down, I think, in Rittman. And they said it would be, she could only come and visit her at the hospital maybe once a week. And my mother thought that Jane just would not survive. She was very much of attached to my mother, and my mother just thought that she would not thrive. So my mother said no, and the family doctor had read about this Sister Kenny program where they massaged the legs and so forth. So she and my grandmother would do this regularly. And Jane scooted around in a little rocking chair. And one night my mother had to be gone overnight. My grandmother lived with them, and Jane knew that my mother wouldn't be home. But my mother got home about 11:30 or 12 o'clock, came in very quietly, and said something to my grandmother, and Jane heard her and got up out of bed and ran to my mother. Now, this is the first she had walked.
Wow.
And it was almost spontaneous that she didn't even think, but because she heard my mother's voice, she ran to her. And after that, it was slow, but she did walk, and in fact, she was in the waves, and nobody ever noticed that. I mean, she was left
waves,
totally.
Many people may not know what that is. Women's Auxiliary.
Well, it was the Navy branch of the women's in the Second World War. She and Luella both were in the waves. But, and then Wayne had a sister that walked on crutches, and supposedly she had polio, and that would have been in the 1800s something. So Mother just really was very attuned to anybody that had polio. And so when in the 40s and the early 50s, when that became very rampant, especially in Wadsworth, in 1953, when I was working in Cleveland, she wouldn't even let me come back to visit. They would come up to visit because there was such an epidemic in Wadsworth at the time, and she drove people back and forth to Akron who had family members that were patients in the hospital over there. And a lot of people wouldn't go near anybody who had somebody in their family had polio because they didn't know if it was contagious or how it was transmitted. So she was very, very instrumental in helping people with polio.
She was, it was something to behold because polio was kind of the AIDS at that time.
Oh, absolutely.
People were scared to death of anything like that. But your mother, a very powerful soul, actually took these kids, put them in her car, took them to Akron, and worked with them and their own families. But this was the word around Wadsworth all the time, that their own families wouldn't help them because they were afraid they might get polio. I can remember when the AIDS scare first came out, that people wouldn't, I mean, nurses would not work with them and all of that. Out of ignorance, I guess, but nonetheless out of fear for one's own life, because self-preservation is a very powerful influence. At the same time, your father was an attorney, but he was also heavily involved with things other than the Park District in Wadsworth. He was, what kinds of things did he do in Wadsworth that very few people knew about?
Well, you're going to have to refresh my memory what road you're going down here.
What about his philanthropy? Now, you had mentioned one or two of them, but weren't there a few other people around town who were given quite a bit by Wayne Garver in terms of just plain outright money or whatever?
Well, I really don't know where you're going with this.
Well, I've heard that from time to time. You know, I've heard people say that Wayne Garver helped me out.
See, those weren't things he came home and talked about.
He didn't talk about those.
No.
What about the people whom he helped get started in practice in Wadsworth? And no one knows about those either.
No, perhaps not me either.
And probably I shouldn't be talking about them because maybe they want it kept very quiet.
Maybe.
But we need to respect Wayne Garver for all of those things. I have had people have come up to me and have said, you know, if you ever talk about Wayne Garver, don't mention my name, but he was so helpful because he gave my parents money when they didn't have any. And I probably didn't tell you or his family or anyone. And I've had at least 2 or 3 attorneys who have come to me and said, Wayne Garver's the one who got me started in Wadsworth. And as far as I'm concerned, that man stands 10 feet tall. So we need to hear that for Wayne Garver. Let's go now to another part that we haven't talked about here, and that is, you had mentioned Girl Scouts and all the Girl Scouts were. Who was the Girl Scout leader at the time, and who were the people who were big in Girl Scouts? The leaders, that is. Do you remember those people? Who was your Girl Scout leader?
I don't remember.
Don't remember that?
I don't remember, but I remember going to Camp Craig up in Hinckley, and I don't know if Camp Craig is still around.
Camp Craig's still there, surely.
And we would go up there for Girl Scout camp and have a great time. And
did you remember people like Mabel Yaki?
No.
Maybe she was before your time, or maybe
the name sounds vaguely familiar, but and I really don't, you know, perhaps if I look back at some pictures, I don't even know if I have pictures of our Girl Scout troop, but I know practically all the girls in my class were in scouting.
Right. You had mentioned also some of the names of the people that you palled around with. Everyone is a female. Who were some of the guys that you palled around? Because you were a friend of males as well as girls.
Well, of course, one of them that came back to our reunion this year was Levi Guy Mills.
Levi Guy Mills. What a tremendous person he is.
And it was so good to see him. And the thing I remember about Guy was he had a personality, and he was a good sport. I told him at our reunion that I remember basketball games where he would be running, you know, they were playing hot and heavy, and he would knock over somebody on the opposing team, and he would turn around and go back and hold out his hand, pull us up, and go on and make the basket, you know.
That's the way Levi would do it, yes.
And Of course, Vince DiCola, which we haven't seen since we graduated. I guess he lives down in Florida. And I don't know, it was just Ed Chernak, who has passed away, Roger Dutt, and of course most of us in our class went to tap dancing class.
And Roger was really a tremendous tap dancer.
Oh, wonderful. He and his brother Al.
Al Broughton.
And Al had the music makers, they had the dance band that played for everything. And I mean, I hear records by Tommy Dorsey and those people, but I think of Al and Roger Dutt because they played their music. And they played it very well.
Very well. Al married Norma Ewing from Wadsworth, Ted Ewing's daughter. And her sister, Marjorie Ewing, married Clifford. Help me, Jim Clifford?
Okay.
I think so. Clifford? I'm almost sure. Okay. But we'll hear about it tonight, I'm sure, because if I ever make a mistake, people call me, and that's good. We'd like to hear that. We're going to run out of time if I don't get a couple more things in here, but I want to hear a little bit more about the, excuse me, pardon me, about the part that your father played in the reinstitution, or whatever we call that word, of the bank in Wadsworth. What had happened? What happened to the bank in Wadsworth?
Well, from what I know, evidently when the Depression came along and people lost their money and the banks closed because they didn't have money to back what people had in the savings. And it was a terrible time all over the country. And for some reason, these people made a very wise choice by approaching Wayne Garver.
Now, what did he do? How was he one of the very few people who was able to get 100% of the?
He went evidently through the books. He went through a couple of lawsuits. I don't know who they sued to get this money back, but it certainly worked, and it was done in 40 days.
That is absolutely stupendous. Now, we're not talking about thousands and thousands of people because the banks were smaller at that time, but do you remember approximately how many people were involved with getting back 100% of their money, and what they said after it was all over with? Well,
they just thought that this man could do anything, I suppose.
That's right, exactly. Do you remember how many people were involved?
No, I don't know how many there were.
Of course, you were very young.
I was very young, and I didn't understand what was going on. I know in growing up, at the time when we grew up in Wadsworth, the population of Wadsworth was less than 10,000.
Oh, my heavens, yes, when in 1940, I think it was only about 5,000 or something like that. Some really quick ones here. Your favorite stores in Wadsworth when you were growing up that had something to do with food or soda fountains and so forth? What were those?
Well, of course, there were the 3 drugstores. There was Brenneman's, and there was Rexall Drug, and there was G&H.
Right.
And we kind of went to all 3 of them, kind of spread our time around. And of course, Benjamin Franklin was always a fun place to go. And Dick's Hardware, of course, we lived next door to Walter Dick and his wife. And so I still walk into a hardware store and smells are very important, I think, to our memory.
They returned that. Storekeepers in Wadsworth knew us all very well, did they not? They knew who you were, and so tell us a little story about that.
You better be good, because if you weren't, it got back to them.
Do you have any?
Oh, yes, I know where you're leading. Well, one day we were seniors, and we went to a slumber party, and one of the girls was smoking, and I wasn't smoking at the time, but they wanted a pack of cigarettes. So I said, well, I'll go into G&H. I buy cigarettes for my mother all the time. And so I went in and bought a pack of cigarettes, and the next morning when I got home, my mother asked me about it. She said, are you smoking? And I said, no. And she said, well, now don't lie to me. And I said, well, I'm not smoking. She said, well, I went to buy a pack of cigarettes last night, and they told me you already had been in and bought me a Well, I had to do some quick explaining, but so you didn't get away with anything growing up in a small town?
No, we've had so many people who have told us that it's almost impossible to do anything in Wadsworth because everyone knew. And I can really relate some of those. One of our people, who was the son of one of our mayors, was telling his father one time that he was at a certain place, and the following day the police had seen him in another place, and he got that one taken care of. Another one was a businessman's son who wanted to get some insurance policies, and he went in there and told him that he had never had any accidents, and the man knew all about his accidents and wouldn't give it to him. I mean, you could not do anything in Wadsworth. Pat Garver Boris, you have been a wonderful, wonderful person to be on this program, because you brought us an element of history that we really didn't know, and that is the inside Wayne Garver. And what a beautiful person that man was. And you do have every right at this point to say to yourself, not only am I pleased and proud of have been associated with Wayne Garver and his having been my father for all of those years, but the entire city of Wadsworth is very proud, very happy, and certainly very fortunate to have had Wayne Garver and Pat and your sisters and everybody else in the family, because it's been wonderful. We are out of time, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's red, black, and yellow, and it kind of looks like a coral snake. Okay, that's another type of king snake. Okay, now this snake is not poisonous. King snakes aren't poisonous, but king snakes, unlike other snakes, they can eat poisonous snakes. This snake can eat rattlesnakes, copperheads. It can be bitten by poisonous snakes, and it's not affected. It doesn't kill them. It doesn't hurt them at all. Okay, why don't you stay in your seats? I'll come to you, okay? I want to see it. Want to see it? So, this snake is immune to venom of poisonous snakes. Now, it doesn't only eat snakes, it'll also eat mice and rats. This one's about 4 months old. Now, when this snake is full grown, she'll be about 5 feet long. She'll probably be about this big around. She'll weigh, close to 30 pounds. Now, this snake is a type of constrictor. Do you guys know what it means to be a constrictor? A constrictor is a type of snake that when it catches its food, it only uses its teeth to hold on. And then what it does is it wraps its strong body around the animal and it squeezes it until it can't breathe anymore. Okay? Then it swallows its food whole. Okay? All snakes swallow their food whole. All snakes eat meat. Okay? There aren't any snakes that are vegetarians. Okay? They all eat meat. Where's it from? This is from California. Could they? They could in the summer, but come winter they would die. They do go through a type of hibernation even in California, but it's not as severe as the animals that hibernate in Ohio.
Oh yeah, get out of my sleeve. It's going around my
This is the first time I've touched this snake.
Okay,
Oh, yeah?
want my hand, eat it. I'm already missing part of my finger.
Oh my god. Oh.
Feels
Okay.
weird.
How long can it get up to?
About 5 feet.
About 5 feet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I didn't get it tested yet.
Okay, now.
One time I've done it feel weird.
They won't bite you. What's that? No.
Have you ever been
Oh,
bitten
dude,
though?
it feels good.
Yeah.
Does it hurt?
No.
I'll put that on his teeth.
The biggest snake I've been bitten by is about 16 feet. Weighed about 150 pounds. Busted my hand, but what's that?
How deep?
They don't really go in very deep because they bite you and let go. But this thing was about 150
What
pounds.
is it, like a nail just going in your hand?
No, the teeth don't really hurt. It's the power behind it. It's like laying your hand down and bashing it with a baseball bat. It's 150 pounds of muscle. Go ahead.
When that python's at its like full grown,
Meat eater.
how many pounds of pressure is it when when his tail is spread?
Their jaws really aren't very strong.
No, like when it's wrapped.
Oh, wrapping around, you know, I don't even know. I don't even know. A lot, yeah.
Would this bite me and hurt me?
No,
Its tongue sticks out.
thanks. Now, some of you notice that he sticks his tongue out too, or actually she. Want to see? Snakes use their tongue just like lizards do. Okay, they use it to help them smell. Now, snakes